Hashem. His Yomi is Menachos Daf Yud, and we're going to start on the bottom of Tesama Beis, so 9b, 2 lines from the bottom. Gemara said in yesterday's daf that it says the word smolit, left-handed 4 times in the Torah by the passage of a Mitzorah, in the purification of Mitzorah, in order to tell us that there you use your left hand, but in general you need to use the right hand, especially by kamitza and by the services in the temple. So, normally Rabbi Yirmiyah or Rabbi Zera, why does it say the following? When we're talking about the Mitzorah, it says you have to place the oil on the Kohen places the oil on his right big ear, his right big right thumb, and his right big toe. It says Abo and Yado Yimanes, Abo and Ragla Yimanes Tilsev. Why does it need to say that? And Rashi says the question is, since it says about the blood of the asham, you should put the oil on the blood of the asham. So then we would know that it's obviously going to be the case that it's on its right hand. So why does it need to repeat that? So the Gemara says on top of Menachos Daf Yud, on top of 10a, the Gemara says Chad lahachshir. So meaning to say, the reason why it says on blood of the asham is to say, Rashi says Chad al bohen bein diyad bein the regel. So one of them is to tell us lahachshir tzadin. The Kohen is supposed to put the blood on the thumb, like this part. You see, if it looks ink, that's because I was writing the Torah this morning. That's why it's filled with ink. It's not because I don't bathe regularly. So one is to put it on the sides is also okay. That's okay. But chad lifts salt studied. And one is to tell us that if you put it on the back side, this side, then it's going to be disqualified. And why does it say al dama asham? Why does it say you need to put the oil on the place of the asham? Says the Gemara on makom dama asham. And why does it say al dama asham and also on makom dama asham? It says it twice. So the answer is l'may asu. Hani, hani, we need it. Ikas of Rahmana al dam asham. The Torah just wrote it. It was on the blood of the asham. Havamina isei in this kaneachlo. I would have said if the blood is still there, you could put the oil. But if the blood has been cleaned off, you can no longer put the oil. Kas Rahmana al makom. So therefore, Torah says put on the place where the blood of the asham was placed. Because of Rahmana al makom, and if the Torah just wrote on the place of the blood of the asham, Havamina dafka nistaneach, I would have said only if it was cleaned could you put it there. Avo isei, but if the blood of the asham is still there, ema havi chatzitza. I might have thought that presents a chatzitza, an interposition between the oil and the body, and so therefore I might have thought it's no good. Kamash malon al dam asham. So therefore we say on the blood of the asham. So, Boker Tov, we're on the top of 10a, around 8 lines from the top. So, Amarava mi'achar dichsev al dama asham, since it states on the blood of the asham, and also it states v'amakom dama asham, since it says you're supposed to put the oil of the Mitzorah, the purification process, come and puts it on the blood of the asham, on the place of the blood of the asham, uksiva yaminis badam, and it also says you have to put it on the right hand in the blood. So if that's the case, why by the Mitzorah does it say Alboa Yado Ayamanis, Alboa Rago Ayamanis? Why does it say that you have to put it on the Boen Yado Yamanis and the Boen Rago Yamanis? This passage about the purification of Mitzorah is written twice. It's written by the Mitzorah who's wealthy, and the Mitzorah is poor, and he can't afford to bring that same level of karbanos. So, meaning to say, even though the Torah had to tell us that you had to put the oil al boen yado, al boen rago, to say, like we said at the top of the page, to allow the sides and to disqualify the back side of the thumb. However, the Torah doesn't need to say boen. It didn't need to say that twice because we already know that from the place of the blood. Elam Rava, so therefore Rava explains why does it need Yemanis, the word Yemanis in all these cases. And he's arguing with the position we saw earlier of Rabbi Zera that the word Smolit is the source for the law that kmitza with the left hand is disqualified. So Rava gives a different approach. Says Rava, yad. Why does it say yad in both places? Look, kmitza, to tell us that this is the source for kmitza, that the kmitza needs to be done with the right hand. Regel. You might remember this Gemara. We added in Zivachim Chavdalid. Regel. Why does it say regel in both places? L'chalitza, to tell us that the chalitza, when the woman removes the shoe from her brother-in-law, that's removed from his right foot. And ozen, and why to say ozen twice? L'ritzia, that's for the piercing of the ear. If there's a Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave who wants to remain, after 6 years, he wants to remain a slave, he pierces his right ear. So then the Gemara says, Smoas Lamaya. So why? So according to Rava, why is the word Smoas coming? Because Rabbi Zera said it's to teach us that Kmitz is in the right hand. According to Rava, we learned it out from Yad. So according to Rava, why is the word left written 4 times? So I'm Rav Sheish Abrei Ravidi, Liv Sol Yamin de Kohen b'Mitzora. It's to tell us that the Kohen cannot use his right hand when he collects the oil for the purification of the Mitzora. He's supposed to collect it in his left hand only, and then take it with his right hand. Then the other Kohen will come and take it with his right hand and sprinkle it. But the Kohen who receives the oil cannot do it in his right hand. It has to be specifically done in his left hand. So Shalot Tomar. So you don't say small nisrabta yamin. So you shouldn't say, well, in a circumstance where you're not allowed to do the left, you have to do the right. But makom shenisrabta small, in a place where you're also allowed to do the left, then shenisrabta yamin. You might think, well, you could also do the right. So we say no, small specifically. And according to Rabbi Zera, what does he do with all these terms? He says, look at the Tanan Debei Rabbi Shmuel. He says, I do nothing with them. Like the Tanan Debei Shmuel. So it says, Kol Parsha Shenemra V'Nishnis, or Nishnis Elbo B'Shvil Davar Shenefchadash. Sometimes the Torah repeats things, and it has one law it needs to teach, and the other laws are repeated, and you don't necessarily expound it. Even though we have a concept of the omni-significance of every word of the Torah, it's not always the case. Sometimes things are repeated because of the context. That would knock out a lot of drashos, but that's what their approach is. Amar Rav Bar Bachana, Amar Rishon Reish Lakish, Kol Makom Shenemar Etzba V'Kuhuna Ba'inan Eina Ela Yamin. Whenever it says these two terms of Etzba and Kuhuna, and also you probably remember this from Zvachim Chavdalad, wherever it says the words finger and Kuhuna in the same context, it means it has to be to tell us that you need to do it specifically with the right. Because assumption oaz etzba ukahuna ba'ina. And do we really need both? But it says the Kohen takes it with his finger, the bottom of the chatas, the government mitzora, and we learn out from mitzora where it says the taval Kohen as etzba oyaminis. And so just like by the mitzora, it's with the right hand, also by the chatas only with the right hand. But what about kamitza? Hare kamitza, the loksiva el kahuna, but kamitza it only says kahoin. It doesn't say etzba. The Tanan comments per small puzzle, and we learned that if you do the kamitza with your left hand, it's disqualified. So Rava explains, oh etzba o kahuna. Rava says what really the teaching is either the finger or the kohen needs to be said in order to require the right. So Amalei Abaye, what are you talking about? When you take the limbs, we know that after the shlita, there's the kabbalah of the blood, and then there's the halacha to the kevesh. So the taking of the limbs, the conveying of the limbs to the ramp of the altar, it says that the kohen is supposed to do it. The kohen takes everything to the altar. So that's the taking of the So Rava's point is that you either needed to say etzba or kahuna, but what about when you take the limbs to the ram? V'tanan haregel shel yamin b'smol, and we know that you take the right foot, in your left hand. Ubeis oral chutz, and the hide is external, meaning to say that's what people see, so they don't see the open wound. But even though that's going, even though it says kohen, it's going in your left hand, because in your right hand, you remember from Zvachim, you were carrying the head. The kohen is carrying the head. So we see from here that kahuna does not require the right hand. Not every time it says it. So Rava says, Ki amrinon o etzba o kahuna b'davar ma'akev kapara. No, when Rava would answer, when we say, if there's the word etzba or kahuna, it needs to be the right, that's only something that's essential for atonement. And the halacha is not essential for atonement because it's possible to do the carbon without any halacha. There are ways to do it. Either you slaughter it on the altar, or basically it's conveyed by different people, and so therefore they just pass it along like an assembly line. So therefore, it's not essential. Not essential. The Gemara says, what about receiving of the blood? That's something that's essential. And the cause of kahuna, and it says there kahuna. They'll say v'krivu b'nei Aaron kohanim es adam, and so we see from here zu kabbalas adam. That's the receiving of the blood. V'tanan kibo b'smol pasul. That if you receive in your left hand, it's disqualified. But Rabbi Shimon machshir, and Rabbi Shimon says it's kosher. So according to Rava, how would Rabbi Shimon? How is Rava's Shita work with Rabbi Shimon? Rava says if it says Kohen, it requires the right, and Rabbi Shimon allows Kabbalah on the left hand. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Kahamris? Oh, you're asking me from Rabbi Shimon? Rava would say Rabbi Shimon Tarti by. Rabbi Shimon needs Etzba and Kahuna. Gemara says, 1 second, we can't accept it only by Rabbi Shimon Tarti. Does Rabbi Shimon really require to both? By Tanya, Rabbi Shimon Omar Kol Makom Shenemar Yad. Rabbi Shimon says wherever it says yad, ein el yamin, etzba ein el yamin. So he says whenever it says the word finger, it means the right. So Rabbi Shimon does not require both etzba and kahuna. The Gemara says, yeah, Rabbi Shimon would say etzba will buy kahuna, kahuna buy etzba. When it says etzba, you don't need kahuna, but when it says kahuna, you do require etzba. So if that's the case, kahuna is almost irrelevant here. What's the reason why you need kahuna? Because it really adds nothing. So he says, you're right. El Kohen Lamui, Bikiuno. That's to tell us that when he does this avoda, the Kabbalah that when he does this avoda, it needs to be done but big day kahuna. It needs to be wearing the garments of the Kohen. So that's what it's teaching us. Okay, so now the Gemara says, but what about the fact on top of Yud Amabeis, Varei Zrika? What about the sprinkling or the throwing of the blood? Delo Kasavei El Kahuna. It only says the words Kahuna there. V'tanan. Now Tanan always in the shot introduces, and we learned in the Mishnah, Zarak a small puzzle, that if you sprinkle with your left hand, it's disqualified. V'lopolag Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon doesn't argue. The reason why I pointed out that Tanan always is introducing a Mishnah, because Tosfos asked the question, Tema, the Ein Zeh Baba Mishnah, B'Shemakom. There is no Mishnah that says this, Tosfos says. So we have a problem, so probably means a brace. So who knows? Maybe they have a different version. Maybe there's some suggest that maybe they want to introduce Malika, not Zrika, but anyway. So there's a little bit of a textual issue here, but he says Zrika do kasabei el buhuna, and we learned if you did so, it only says kuhuna, and if you did the Zrika with your left hand, it's disqualified. Rabbi Shimon doesn't argue. Gemara says he does argue. Amar Bai Polag the Brisa. He doesn't argue in that quote unquote Mishnah, which we don't know where it is, but he does argue in the Brisa. The Tanya Kibo B'Smol Pasul Rabbi Shimon Machshir, because we learned in the Brisa if you received it in your left hand, it's disqualified. And Rabbi Shimon says it is kosher. So we learned if Rabbi Shimon Machshir, Zarak B'Smol Pasul Rabbi Shimon Machshir. So we see Rabbi Shimon says if it's kosher if you do Zrika in the left hand. So he does argue there because it doesn't say etzba. And the Gemara says Elahada Amarava Ya Ya L'Kmitza Lamali. So let's go back to the teaching we had on Amad Aleph that Rav says Yad Yad is coming to teach us Kmitza. Why does he need that? Why does he need Yad that it says Yad by Mitzora Ani? Why does he need that? He could have learned out from the fact that it says Kahuna, Mikahuna Nafka. He could have derived it from the word Kahuna, which appears by the Komets. So he says, Kad Komets, yeah, he says one is needed to teach us that Kmitza requires the Yamin, the Chad Kiddush Komet, and one is to teach us that the Kiddush of the Komets requires the Yamin. what's the kiddush of the kometz? So we have different versions based upon what Rashi says here and what Rashi says in Zevachim about kiddush kometz. So here Rashi says that it means the chimikadesh l'kometz bekui, that when you were after you, so there's the process of the kamitza that you scoop up the flour with your fingers from the utensil. But we also know that after that you have to be nistinas bekui. You take that kamitza and you stick it into another utensil. And so Rashi says you have to stick it with your right hand into the utensil. You have to take that and stick it with your right hand. That's what Rashi says over here. But Rashi in Zvachim, and this was pointed out by the Chafetz Chaim, has a little bit of a different version. That Rashi says in Zvachim, hold on, usually they have, well, our my Gemara here doesn't have, for some reason, doesn't have the Likutei Rashi. That it has to be in his right hand. That's what Rashi says. The Shita Mekubetzis brings down a name of Rabbeinu Paretz that a different case. He says that we're talking about a case that we're talking about a case where he put it in his left hand. So therefore, we have a little bit of a problem. And in Zvachim, Rashi says that you have to hold the hand you have to hold the utensil in his right hand. Meaning to say that when the flour is poured into the utensil, the first time it needs to be done in your right hand. And anyway, there's no universal agreement about what it means exactly, but there's some other process which requires the right hand, either when it was put into the second utensil or when you were holding the first utensil. All right. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon the Lo. So the Gemara says, so what does Rabbi Shimon expound from this Gzera Shava of Yad? The Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon the Lo by Kiddush Kometz. He doesn't require the Kiddush Kometz in the Mincha at all. We're going to learn this on Daf Chav Vav, where it says that if you don't put it into a Kli Shares, Rabbi Shimon still says it's Machshir. And there are two Amoraim who argue about Rabbi Shimon's position. One is the position of Rabbi Yana and Rabbi Nachman Yitzchak. One says the reason Rabbi Shimon is that you don't require the placing it in a utensil. Hold on one second. So Rashi says there's a dispute there that one says that Rabbi Shimon doesn't require placing in the utensil because since once you did the kamitza, you could then place it on the altar, even in a pottery shovel. And one says everybody says it requires kushars, meaning to say after you did this kamitza, do you have to put it in another utensil or not? Or can you just throw it on the altar? The Gemara is a little bit vague about exactly the process of putting the kamitza on the altar, which is the essential part on the fire. Anyway, so the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Shimon, no abai kiddush kometz. So according to Rabbi Shimon, who doesn't require the kiddush kometz, Uman da Amar Nami the buy kiddush kometz for Rabbi Shimon. And according to one of those positions there, he says he does require it, and nevertheless, bismoach shuri machshir. But if it was done with the left hand, it's kosher. So according to Rabbi Shimon, yad de Rabba Lamli. So So according to Rabbi Shimon, why is there yad? If it's coming to teach us that the kamitza itself is according to Rabbi Shimon's with the right hand. My time there was Shimon Damakra, Kodesh Kodeshim, he kachatats v'kasham. That why is Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Chia, what's the reason for Rabbi Shimon that the mincha was not the Kaddish in the Krisharis is kshera, because he says that Kodesh Kadeshi kachatats kasham. And it's the mincha is compared to chatas and asham. It's coming to teach us that when if you want to take the kometz to burn it without first sanctifying in a utensil, you could just do it with your hand. To be a man, but you have to do it with your right hand. Kechatas, meaning to say, Rabbi Shimon is saying, according to this approach, that Rabbi Shimon says it compares it to chatas to say you could just throw it on the altar with your hand. But if you want to put it in a utensil, then it has to be. Then it could even done ovda small. Then you could do it even with your left hand ka'asham. So according to Rabbi Shimon, if that's the case, what is yad yad that Rava said for Rabbi Shimon? Because Rabbi Shimon's use doesn't require the right hand. So the Gemara says, "Nitzracha el kometz de minchas chote." No, it's teaching us the kmitza of a mincha of a sinner, that his kmitza needs to be done specifically with the right hand. And the reason why it's needed to teach us this is meaning, say, if he doesn't put it in the utensil, if he comes to put it right on the altar, you might have thought to say, "Ho v'amar Rabbi Shimon shloyei karbanon lehuda." Since Rabbi Shimon says that the mincha of a sinner doesn't need to be, since we all know that the Torah tells us that the mincha of a sinner doesn't have oil on it, because the oil is to add splendor to the mincha, and Rabbi Shimon says that the reason why it doesn't have oil is so that the mincha of the sinner should not be muhuder. So beautiful. He might have thought if you did it with your left hand, it's kosher. Kamashma, we don't say that. Okay, we're going to continue now because we have time, Baruch Hashem. But I'm going to stop the recording because this is the daf yomi for today.